very much, Callum. And it's so great to see so many people here this evening. Thank you so much for coming out. So my name's Ellie Harrison. I'm one of the volunteer directors at Glasgow Community Energy, and I've been involved in the project since the very beginning, back in 2015. And a show of hands for, actually, I know Danny, anybody else who was involved all the way back then? A couple of folks. You'll no doubt remember that at the beginning the project was known as the Radical Renewable Art and Activism Fund, which slowly evolved into Glasgow Community Energy in 2018 when we got our first grant from Local Energy Scotland. So the idea from the very beginning was to try to create a new ethical, autonomous and renewable funding scheme from the proceeds of selling renewable energy. So 9 years later, I am absolutely delighted tonight to be launching a £10,000 pot, which has been generated from selling electricity at our first 2 solar installations over the last 3 years. And from this day on, this fund will be known as the Cathy McCormack Community Activism Fund, in honour of the hugely inspiring community activist and anti-poverty campaigner from Easterhouse, who very sadly died in 2022. I'm sure there's a good few people in the audience tonight who knew Cathy, either as family, as a friend, or as a collaborator, or perhaps through her remarkable book, The Wee Yellow Butterfly, which came out in 2009. So what we hope in naming our fund in honour of Cathy, and by specifically funding community organisations to deliver projects and initiatives inspired by her work, is that we're going to enable her legacy and her radical spirit to live on in Glasgow for years to come. So what I'm going to do in this little section of tonight's event is to say a little bit more about Cathy's work, to talk a bit about her brief involvement in the project in its early stages, and then set out how we hope the fund will work over the next few years. I'm then really pleased that we have Cathy's son, Gary McCormack, here, who's going to say a few words at the end about his amazing mum. So for those of you who don't know Cathy, a good place to start is with her book, The Wee Yellow Butterfly, which you should be able to find in all good Glaswegian libraries, I hope. I would say buy it online, but I think it's out of print and it's quite expensive to get online now, but it will be in libraries. The book sets out Cathy explains about her life trying to bring up a young family in chronically damp housing in the late 70s and in the 80s in Easterhouse, and talking about the impact that the housing quality had on all of their health. And she really clearly outlines how the attitude of the officials at the time was to ignore the fact that it was the poor quality housing that was causing the dampness, and all of the related respiratory problems that they were suffering from. And instead, they blamed the tenants for not putting the heating on enough. So that was, of course, an incredibly expensive solution that the tenants had to pay for themselves, not to mention incredibly wasteful, as they discovered that all of the heating was just going out of the roofs because the housing was so poorly insulated. So Cathy sets out in her book how she began to make the connections between these local social injustices and the wider environmental crisis that we were swiftly going into. And how her solution was not to just treat the symptoms of dampness in their houses, but, as she puts it in the book, to join her community's fight for justice instead. So together as part of the East Hall Housing Association, they campaigned relentlessly for the housing quality to be improved. And what I found so inspiring was the amazing range of tactics that they used in their campaign to raise awareness for the issues of dampness. So I'm just going to show you a couple of examples. My favourite is the community theatre production that they put on in 1990 called Damp Busters, and this was to coincide with Glasgow's official celebrations for the capital of culture, but was to obviously draw attention to the poor housing quality that so many people on the outskirts of the city were being forced to live in. So this is a picture of Cathy here, dressed up as penicillium, I think it's called, which was one of the two main types of mould which was growing in their houses at that time. In the show, they show up as unwanted guests at the house. And this film, I don't know if anybody saw it, but it was screened at the CCA in 2021, so there was an opportunity to see footage from the live show. And hopefully there'll be other opportunities to see it again in the future. On a more practical level, the East Hall Residents Association also began looking for engineering solutions to the dampness problems, to reduce fuel poverty and to conserve energy. So they ran the Heat Fest competition or project in 1987, and the idea was to bring engineers to East Hall to try to find imaginative solutions to these problems. Cathy was then able to secure funding from the EU and eventually also from Glasgow City Council to be able to make the winning design a reality. And that resulted in the East Hall demonstration project, which you can see here, which was a pioneering solar heating project, which was completed in 1992 and was the first of its kind in the world. These two slides here are from a film called A View from Glasgow, which Gary very kindly sent me the link to, which was made by Glasgow City Council about the East Hall project. I think to accompany one of Cathy's visits to the UN, because that was the activity that she sort of got into later in the 90s. We also have here Colin Porteous, who's a Glasgow Community Energy member, who is an architect from Glasgow School of Art, I think now retired, but worked with Cathy on the East Hall project. So obviously we're really pleased to have him as a member. He also told me that all of the archives from the East Hall project are in the Glasgow School of Art archives, which are available for the public to view at the Whiskey Bond if anybody's interested in finding out more. I also wanted to shout out to Patrick, but I don't know if he's here actually, Patrick Bose. I can't see him, which is a shame. He's a Glasgow Community Energy member, but he was also really helpful in the first 4 years of the project to help get us off the ground. He was also the person that introduced me to Cathy. I was very lucky to meet Cathy in 2018 and 2019. And she was very supportive of what we were trying to do with the Glasgow Community Energy project. And she was also quite realistic when we explained the ambition behind it about how much work may be involved in getting something like this off the ground. And it certainly has been. And actually we have been 2 years delayed in launching the Community Benefit Fund because we were working to get this final piece of paperwork signed with the council. But we have now done that, and I'm sure that Cathy probably would have found that saga quite entertaining, but I'm not going to go into the details right now. So just to set out briefly how the fund is going to work, and this is also set out in the agreement that we have signed with the council, so we need to stick to it. But it means there's a sort of soft launch, because for the first 5 years of our operation, so up to 2026, the fund is going to be available exclusively to our local community organisations near to the 2 school sites. So we've already nominated those organisations. We actually did that at the AGM last year. But then after the first 5 years, so from 2027 onwards, the fund is going to open up. It's going to be available for others to be able to apply to across the city. And obviously we have plans to expand, which Jo is going to tell you more about, and hopefully build up a bigger pot of money, so that we can, potentially fund much more ambitious initiatives through this in the future. So the recipient organisations are listed here. We have Glendale we have Pollock Shields Trust, which is just next door to Glendale Primary School, who we have an agreement with, who actually helped us to get that site secured. And then we've nominated 4 community organisations in the northeast of Glasgow, close to Ashton Secondary School. And we have some representatives from these organisations here. We have Jo from the Pollock Shields Trust at the back there. Give a little wave. I think also we have Duncan from Fuse Youth Cafe, who's here. Brilliant. Thank you so much. Hopefully you'll be able to come and have your picture taken later. We were also expecting Beth from East End Flat Pack Meals, but unfortunately she's had an accident today and wasn't able to come. I just want to finish with a quote which I've been sent from Neil Young at St Paul's Youth Forum, which is an amazing organisation in Black Hill. Neil very sadly couldn't be here tonight, but he sent this quote which I would like to read out. We are honoured to be one of the recipients of the first Cathy McCormack Community Activism Fund grants. Cathy was an inspiration to many in St Paul's Youth Forum as a local person who stood up against the political forces to ensure that there was justice for all. We strongly believe in the power of local people coming together to make a difference. This grant will enable people suffering from depression and other mental health issues to tackle both food poverty and the climate emergency through growing together in our new community farm. We'll tackle the challenges of our time by building strength and resilience. We will use the grant towards a social area in the farm, somewhere where people can sit and socialise, but also a decorative area for quiet reflection and some pollinator-friendly plants, tying in with Cathy's yellow butterfly. We're delighted to be able to support so many of Cathy's passions with this funding. So I'm now going to hand over to Gary, who has very kindly offered to say a few words about his dear mum. Back to you, Ray. You can come out.
So I don't have a speech prepared, but I hope I can kind of give a bit of flavour of what it was like to grow up with my mum. So in 1985, I was born in Easterhouse. At that point, my mum had 3 kids, and she had postnatal depression. So she lived in a cold, damp house. She was unemployed. She didn't see a future. Our health was failing. She was taking us to the doctors. So she was very depressed. And in her book, she talks about how she wanted to go to sleep and never wake up again. And she tells me this story, I don't know if it's actually in the book, but she said that she was thinking this, and I put my hand through the cot and took her hand, and at that point it dawned on her that no one was going to come and change the future of her children, so she was going to have to do it herself. And it was that point in 1985 she joined East Hall Residents Association, and, as you rightly said, picked up our community struggle for better housing and better health. I think one of the key things to point out is, although my mum was an activist, and I was saying to Ellen, I was pleased it was mentioned in there, it was very much a collective. It wasn't one person. So my mum did have a vision of a better future, but she shared that vision, and I think that's quite an important thing, that we talk to each other about how we want our community to be better. Because when you start to talk about how you want to improve things, you start to attract towards you those who can help you. I've spoken at a few events recently and met a lot of people that knew my mum, and one of the things that say, you know, your mum could speak to anyone, whether it was, you know, someone in our community or an academic. But that's because we all share a kind of a common aspiration to leave the world a better place than when we found it. And I think that's the really special thing about activists, is that they're willing to give up their free time and their peace so that their community can be better tomorrow. But yeah, my mum was obviously a big inspiration to myself and a big inspiration to many people. But what gave her great joy was people like Colin, who my mum mentioned, Helen Martin, you know, her friend, and other people, because that's something that we need to remember as well. You know, activists, whoever you are, trying to make a bigger difference in the world, you have to remember that social aspect, and that's, I think, why Mum was a good community organiser. And I was, you know, telling Ellie about it, that I remember South American musicians coming to East Hall, to the back end of Easter House, different singers coming, they would have parties, they would have drinks, because they're all wanting to improve the community, but it's that spirit and connection between each other that gives people the power to keep going. My mum left school at the age of 15, so obviously she didn't have a great education, but when she became an activist, she became alive. She gave up a lot of her free time, read a lot, studied, met academics, and you know, a lot of her work now is published in academic journals. She guest edited a lot of psychological journals. So I suppose my message really is, whatever your dream of a better future is, you can do it, and that would be the message I think my mum would want to bring, is like, whatever you want to achieve, even if you think it's not possible, just believe in it, and you will bring the right people together. I travel into Glasgow for work, although I don't live here, and I remember growing up in the cold damp house where your shoes were mouldy, your toys were mouldy, and now you go in and you see all the nice housing. But that was a kind of a community effort, and we've seen in the news recently that people have died with dampness in other areas. So I do feel the community activists in Easter House really did do good and changed Easter House for the better. So pretty much in summary, that was kind of all I wanted to say about my mum, just that it's an incredible honour that it's named after her and her memory will go on. But you know, towards the end of her life, she was terminally ill and she kept saying, you know, I don't want to go, there's too much work to be done. But one of the things that kept her going was all the young activists that would come out. So I had, you've probably got the Ring doorbell on your phone, so I would be watching and I'd see all these young people, you know, tripping up to see my mum, students that would just want to come and spend time with her. So yeah, I think she would be really proud, and that kind of helped her towards the end to know that there were so many young people that would take on that struggle and create a better future for her grandchildren. So it's an honour that it's named after her, so I just want to say a big thank you.